Welcome to the Passion Business Podcast, the podcast for free spirits with a big idea who want to turn their passion into a business. I'm Anke Herman and I'm your host. My guest today is a marketing agency founder, podcaster and musician. He runs a podcast launch and production agency based in San Diego and heads an international team that helps business coaches, consultants, and thought leaders use done-for-you podcasting to attract an audience and become MicroFamous. He's the author of MicroFamous and currently hosts the MicroFamous podcast. Welcome, Matt Johnson.
Hello and welcome, Matt. I'm excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here.
Fabulous. Well, let's just dive straight in. Why don't you let people know where you're based and where you're from and what's your business?
Okay. Well, based in San Diego, although I'm not originally from here. I'm from the Midwest in the States and from the land of cold and snow. And so I'm very much enjoying living out in San Diego. But basically what I do is I help thought leaders launch and produce podcasts. So we work with a lot of business coaches and consultants and speaker author types. And about 5 years ago, I was just some dude working in a marketing agency, working for somebody else. And he had the idea to kind of promote me into business development. And his idea was, we're going to do all these Google Hangouts with these people that we have, strategic relationships with. And so I started hosting these live video events with big people in the real estate space because that's where most of the clients were of that agency. And I got a chance to just hang out with these people and ask them good questions. And turns out my background from many years ago back in real estate came in handy because I had read all the books and I knew who the coaches were and stuff like that. So I was just able to ask good questions. So those Google Hangouts went well to the point where one of the people I was co-hosting them with just called me up one day and said, "Hey man, I'd love to start a podcast with you." And it's funny because I was thinking about pitching him the same idea. I was going to call him like the next week. So it was good timing. Wow. And that show ended up doing really well. I still co-host that to this day. It's called Real Estate Uncensored, has like 1.5 million downloads, and essentially took me from being just a nobody that worked inside a marketing agency to speaking at industry events and being kind of micro-famous in that space in about 18 months. And so I watched that transformation like with my own eyes and lived through that. And then that kind of led to people asking me like, "Hey, how are you doing this? How are you hosting multiple podcasts?" And like I ended up in like 4 different businesses. I was a partner in coaching, consulting business, all this stuff. Anyway, point being, I got sucked into being an agency owner. So that was never my intention. I was doing like 3 or 4 other things. I was going to do coaching, consulting. I was going to speak in real estate. I was going to be in real estate happy as a clam for the rest of my life. And then I got pulled into starting and launching podcasts and producing them. And now we produce a bunch of shows and that's my sole focus. So I run the agency in about 3 to 4 hours a week, which leaves me the time to still do the stuff that I'm passionate about. Like you can see on video, I'm surrounded by all the musical instruments and stuff. So I still get to make music and work on that in my off hours because I have a business that I can run in just a few hours a week.
Oh, that sounds like heaven.
I don't know about heaven, but it's not bad.
I love how it sort of naturally evolved, out of basically being open and exploring and following the path in front of you a little bit. Like that's what it sounds like, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit. I got off of that path quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mentioned that I was in a few different businesses and like when I came out of an agency that sells one thing pretty much to one type of person. Mm-hmm. And I saw the beauty and the simplicity in that model. And I saw how my mentor scaled that up to where they have 500 clients just paying them monthly recurring, fees. And but when I got into that space, I got tempted and I got drawn off course because I was good enough at what I did that I started to get other opportunities and they all sounded cool and they were all with these amazing people that I wanted to work with. And so I said yes to way too much stuff. I was in 2 different coaching consulting companies. I was in a content training material production business, and then I ended up in a business to take podcasting into the financial services space. And I looked up one day and realized that like every time I would have a meeting with my partners, I would walk away with a mile-long to-do list of stuff that had to be done before the next meeting, and they would not. And I'm like, well, this can't be. But what I really realized is that I had made like my first huge mistake in business, which I tried to do this thing where I thought I was focusing by being in like 4 different things, but they were all in one industry. Because my idea was Like if you were any type of person and you came across me, if you bought anything, I made a cut off of it. That was my idea at the time of being focused. And then I woke up one day and realized this is not focus. Selling one thing to one type of person is focus. And so when I made that decision to kind of get back on that track and I made that my goal, that's when I started to realize, okay, well, that means I need to get out of this. I need to get out of this, And then I'm like, well, okay, well, if I'm going to get out of all that stuff, like what am I going to focus on? Well, I'm going to focus on the thing where I have 100% ownership and I get 100% of the reward when it goes well. So why do I not just dive into the podcast production and make that my sole thing? So just having that goal, we talked about before we hit record, just kind of knowing where you want to end up. You don't know exactly how to get there, but just knowing where you want to end up. That's where I wanted to end up. I wanted to have one thing to sell to one type of person, and that helped clarify a lot.
Yeah, and I love how I think a lot of listeners can resonate, because I was giggling. It's like, oh yeah, it's like when the sort of the multi-passionate people, when you love a lot of things and you're good at a lot of stuff, so it's so tempting, to take on this and take on that, and when you easily get excited about stuff, about new projects and creating something new, but yeah, you build yourself a hamster wheel. Really quickly.
Yes, cool. That's exactly what it is. I was getting, because I do a fair bit of podcast interviews in different spaces, and I got the opportunity to go on a podcast that's run by another agency owner. And we were set to do a pre-interview call, and she couldn't make it, so she sent her next in command. And the person said, like, oh, they weren't able to show up. Like she had to had some fires to put out. You know how it is. And I'm thinking, no, I really don't. I don't. But there's a reason for that, which is because we're so focused on like doing one thing for one type of person, we're able to put a lot of work into having really good systems where we do the same things over and over again. And because of that, we're able to attract and retain really good people. And they know exactly what they need to do each week. They know exactly what numbers they're responsible to hit. And we've encountered most of those problems before, and we can solve them once and for all. So like when most of our clients' podcasts, their shows launch on Thursday, when I used to wake up on a Thursday morning, that was a stress day, right? Because something was always going wrong in the early days when we were doing a whole bunch of different stuff for different people. The more that I focused and narrowed down, now I barely know when it's Thursday and I wake up. I have so many other calls booked, I don't even think about the client launches anymore because I know my staff has it. Yeah. That only came as a result of us getting focused and super clear and doing one thing over and over again. And I think that people that are like multi-passionate and creative, if you never experience what that's like to like have things being done for clients that you don't have to worry about, you don't realize how much freedom and how much creativity that opens up. Whereas if you're doing all these different things, it almost like it's technically creative, but you're always in panic mode. So it almost like shuts the creative part of your brain down.
Oh, this is gold right there. Like that's going to be the title of the episode. Because actually, it's funny. I was speaking to somebody on a workshop yesterday about, and she was talking about niching down and how the narrow that niche is, and how like the more precise you can define what you do for what kind of person, that actually opens up all the opportunities for your business. And people have so much resistance, and I can understand it, because I was kind of like, for a very long time, that idea of like, no, I don't want to like give this go or that go. But I love how you put that at actually when you know that this is taken care of and that ticks over, then all of a sudden you're free to create. Ooh.
Well, I mean, the book wouldn't exist, right? Something there was a time starting like January of last year when I stopped booking any appointments in the afternoon. And that book wouldn't exist if I hadn't been able to do that. There's no way I could have written the book in the gaps between calls or on the evenings and weekends. I've got chronic fatigue and adrenal fatigue, and like I've dealt with energy levels for years. I don't have 10 to 12 hours of my best work in me every day for any long stretch of time. And so I had to build the business in such a way that I wake up and I know I've got about 4 hours of labor intensive stuff, and then I completely unplug. And then everything else after that is optional, which means it could be a day where I spend the rest of the afternoon taking a walk on the beach, Or maybe it's a day where I spend the afternoon working on music and I completely unplug from the business. For a while there, it was me working on the content for the book, and I spent 60 to 90 minutes in a Starbucks writing the book, right? But none of that would have happened if I hadn't narrowed my focus and gotten the business to the point where it ran fairly smoothly. And yeah, I just realized that, like, when I was in the panic mode, when I was on that hamster wheel of doing a whole bunch of different things for clients, I didn't have the mental and emotional space to even think about music. And there was 5 years where I chased the dream as a pro musician. Like, I have played the drums since I was 2 years old. It is baked into the fabric of my being to play music. And being on the hamster wheel of business completely shut that area of my life down for 3 years until I got the business straightened out. So yeah, like I think there's probably a lot of creatives out there that you think you're being creative in the business, and it's actually shutting down. It's keeping you from being creative in the things you're actually really passionate about.
That's so true. That's so true. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Now, what I'm curious about, when you left the agency, how did you get your very first client that was just yours?
Well, a couple things. So, and this goes back to kind of the idea of niching down, right? So my very first consulting client, which by the way paid for all my living expenses and allowed me to kind of focus on growing the business without having to worry about a paycheck, that was the first big win for me. And that came about by just through a happenstance introduction through the agency owner I used to work for. All right, and then happened to be we're all from the same city, right? So he was starting up a coaching consulting company, and he wanted somebody to help him market it. And I had enough of the skill set, and I basically just walked in there and said, like, you need me. Right? Like, we're going to do this. I'm going to launch you a podcast. We're going to get you on, interviewed on podcast. Like, I knew enough about that world to kind of confidently say I could do X, Y, and Z. Well, I ended up being an equity partner in that company. And he's still one of my good friends to this day. We still produce his podcast. I co-hosted it for a couple years. So number one, I worked my network of personal relationships. And then the second thing, like where it came from there, is I started to host podcasts, and the people that I met through networking, including on just being active on LinkedIn and booking guests for my own show, I would, like in the course of those conversations, they would ask me what I did. And I would just tell them that, yeah, it's when we basically do done-for-you podcasting for, thought leader coaches type, coach consultants. And this is the response that I would get. Holy cow. That exists? You mean I can just show up and hit record and not have to worry about anything else? I'm like, well, yeah, it's basically what I built for myself. And so, yeah, that's the response that I would get. That was that first little clue that sent me down the road of like, well, what is a clear and compelling idea for a business? How do you come up with like 1 to 2 sentences to describe what you do that gets that kind of reaction? Because that was the key to everything. That was where all my early clients come from. It's still where most of my clients come from, is just the networking, personal relationship, influence in the circles that I run in. And it's because the idea of the business itself does part of the marketing for me. Yeah. So that when I meet people that are in my circles, they instantly understand what I do. It's clear, it's memorable, and whenever they run into somebody that's thinking about podcasting, they go, oh, you got to talk to Matt. Yeah. Like, I'm just automatically that guy. And because the idea of the business is very clear and it's compelling to the right people. So all that to say, that's where my early clients came from, and you can do the same thing. Like if you really do choose the right niche and you choose the right people, it's not that hard to get those initial clients. And if you get clients that are influential and affluent in your space, well, then when you do a good job for them, they can't shut up about you.
Yeah, that's so true. And I mean, I must say, when I heard you describe that, like the moment you get that, you say what you do and you get this, oh, I need you kind of thing, I've really had that happen with the Tech Monster book. Because when I saw Outtain the Tech Monster, people giggle first and then they go, oh, I need you.
Yes,
so
exactly.
People get that. Yeah, it's not even about tech fear, it's about tech frustration. It's like, oh, this stuff does my head in, right? So it's not that I can't do it, but boy, but people get it. And it's it's that. Now I'm seeing behind you, and people who are just listening won't see that obviously, but MicroFamous. Tell me how that came about, because obviously the podcast is part of that. Mm-hmm. What's the other part? And how did that come about?
Okay. Well, like as an agency owner, as someone, I wanted more ideal clients, and I noticed that I was running into a lot of the same beliefs in my clients, the people that I would work with. And I was constantly fighting upstream against the Gary Vee mentality of be everywhere, be everywhere online, be everything to everyone, like never turn down a sale. Like you don't turn down a sale. If somebody wants to hand you a check, you figure out a way to say yes. I constantly run up against that mentality. And what I saw is it was damaging my clients because it was leading them away from the very thing that would make the biggest difference in their podcast, which is having a very, very razor sharp, clear, and compelling idea for their show that cuts through the noise and gets the attention of the right people. So them trying to like be everywhere and appeal to everyone and try to build this big audience was actually leading them away from the thing that would build them a good audience and would actually make them money. So I wrote the book to kind of like fight back and push back against all that stuff and basically lay out a vision where you can say, look, you don't have to be everywhere. You don't have to be on every social media platform. You do not have to go and try TikTok. Right? You do not have to start dancing and singing karaoke to grow your business. You don't have to be everything to everyone. But I wanted to give people the roadmap to show them the vision of what is it like when you are famously influential just to the right people, and then you can deliver to them a message that speaks really deeply, and you can basically happily and gladly repel everyone else. And you mentioned that people struggle with niching down. That's one of the parts that people struggle with is, look, if you want to strongly attract some people, you're going to have to be okay with strongly repelling everyone else. And you have to be okay with that. And I wanted to give people a way to really take pride in that. How do you take pride in only serving a focused, perfect group of people for you and not worry about everyone else? Well, be famously influential to the right people. Be micro-famous. And then you won't worry about being, everywhere all the time and trying to be everything to everyone. So that's kind of why I started down that path. And so the first third of the book is really nothing about tactics. It's nothing about podcasting. It's about the strategy of how do you decide where you want to be micro-famous? Who are the right people? Who are your ideal clients? How do you make those decisions? How do you come up with an idea that speaks really deeply to them so that when you tell people what you do, you get that wow response that you get with the Tech Monster Whisperer? And if people get a hold of that, well, then when you do get into podcasting, it actually works. And it generates, 10 times the revenue that you put into it.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And the Gary Vee, it's like, oh God, yeah, you have. And when you said don't, you can't repel or reject anybody who wants to give you a check. And actually, I remember Landon Porter, the sales gorilla. He really changed my way of looking at this in this way that makes me giggle every time, because he says, no. What you want to do is you want to be very careful who you allow to obligate you with their money.
I love it. That's exactly how I look at it too.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah. And I think it resonated so much with me because my first, business project that I did for many years was making flamenco dance costumes for artists. And I didn't know that bit. So I was there thinking if somebody wanted something, it was just my job to give them what they wanted, right? Yeah. And then I ended up with a lot of clients that I wouldn't have taken on if I had known, this other way of looking at it. So, and it only dawned on me when I came to this real place of burnout where the frustration that when somebody who you really love working with calls and wants you to say, and you have to say no because you're full with people, with projects that you don't actually enjoy. Well, I thought, what on earth am I doing, right? So I was slowly sinking in that no. If you're working in that space, it's not like a shop where you have to attend to everybody who walks in. Like you choose who you want to work with, and to even realize that actually, that's okay. That's part of it took me a long time to get there. So that's why this resonated so much with me.
Yeah, and it took me a while to get there too, and to where now the point where one of my friends jokingly called me the double black diamond master of saying no to a potential client, which is funny because the day he said that was right before I had a consultation with somebody that was a little outside of our ideal client space, and it was a good reminder. So I sent them to another agency. But we all need that from time to time. We all get tempted to kind of get off course and go, I can do both. I can do both. I can serve that client too. But yeah, like if creativity is a really high value, for you, yeah, you do have to be really careful, like who you allow into your life, because your clients affect your creativity. And you can feel like you're being creative in the things that you do for them, but if it then takes away from your ability to creatively build your business or creatively pursue your other passions, that in business or not, it shuts down that part of your brain like we talked about. So one of the things that I notice with people that are really creative that might be helpful, because I do this, is it's like, well, if I'm going to focus on like one type of person and I'm going to sell them basically one thing over and over and over again, where do I scratch my creative itch? And I think there's two places. Number one, you can scratch your creative itch by going deeper into that one problem that you solve, right? So I made a decision years ago to kind of consider myself a marketing professional, but that's a pretty broad thing. I could be doing a lot of different stuff. I could be coaching people on how to build YouTube channels, for example, but I don't, right? Because I want to stay focused on podcasting. So part of where I get the creative itch for podcasting is I keep going deeper and I keep peeling away the layers of the onion to help people uncover their idea for their podcast. And that's where I get to scratch my creative itch every time I sign up a new client, because I'm helping brand and launch this whole new thing. And every client's a little bit different, even if they're in the same industry. So that's one way that I get to scratch my creative itch. And then the other is with the structure of the business itself. Right? You can be a solopreneur, you can have a team of freelancers, you can start hiring employees, you can get an office. Like, you can also scratch that creative itch just in how you build your own business and how you market yourself and how you take on more clients. So there's a bunch of ways to kind of scratch that creative itch if you're the creative type. It doesn't have to be with working with a bunch of different types of people and selling them different types of things.
Oh yeah, I love that. Because I think it's most of the time is more people can't see that bit, can't see through that. Oh, if I have to do the same thing over and over, I get bored. Mm-hmm. You hear it all the time, but then
we do the same thing over and over again. But yeah, every week is, like every new client I take on is a little bit different, and it's awesome to help them launch knowing that I've done something in one space long enough to have real expertise. You ever read the book The Business of Expertise by David Baker?
No. Okay.
So he said something in there that was really good, and it really hit home. He said something to the effect of, if you're constantly working with clients in new industries or new spaces that you don't know about, that's fine, but just understand that you're charging your client for you to learn, because they're assuming you're already bringing that expertise. And if you don't have it, you're having to build it on the fly. You're essentially charging them for you to dabble. I'm like, wow.
Which is true.
Like that was, hits you right in the center. So yeah, so if you hear things like that and you go, wow, you're right, I might like to dabble because that makes me feel good, but I'm shortchanging my clients the more that I do that. Like, okay, well that helps you be okay, like be more settled and confident in focusing on one type of client, because then you realize, okay, focusing on that one type of client is what allows me to see those same patterns over and over again. That's where my expertise comes from. Yeah. I think a lot of people that struggle with, like, how am I different and what am I going to tell a client if they ask me why they should hire me? That's a sign that you don't have really strong opinions about how things should be done, because you haven't solved the same problem over and over and over and over again. Like, that's where those strong opinions come from. And when he pointed that out in the book, I was just like, yeah, it was just confirmation that, the more you focus on the right kind of people and you solve the same problem over and over again, the more valuable you are to them.
Yeah. And I love how you remind us or help us see that, well, actually there's a lot of freedom and a lot of creativity and a lot of expansion in going deeper rather than wider. So it isn't boring. It's just, you just, and I actually that really resonates when I look at the sewing, where it was like, no. And I actually said after 15 years, I thought, like now is when I enjoy it most, because I'm really good at it now. right? I can
Yeah.
see a dress and I can almost, cut it without a pattern, or I kind of know, it's almost, it's quick, it's effortless. But that comes from all
Lots
the trial,
of effort.
all the trial and error and all the, it's that learned and earned expertise that actually opens up a lot of room for creativity and freedom. And so, yeah, absolutely. That's fabulous.
Oh yeah, and the thing that I didn't realize, back probably 2012, 2013, when I was just doing like independent marketing consulting things, and it was, probably terrible at it. What I didn't realize is that, like, I started off by charging low prices and attracting people that were going to pay me low prices. When I did the opposite, which I didn't necessarily intend to do it this way, I kind of stumbled onto this strategy, but working with people that were at the top of the field and charging them higher prices, it forced me to get really good really quickly. Mm-hmm. And what was funny about it is those people that were at the top of the market, they were the most influential. They were also fairly patient with new things, trying new things, experimenting, right? They had a high tolerance for risk. They really only needed somebody to come to them with a good idea, that they had a vision, they could see that it would work, and you seem like you're competent and you seem like you're confident in what you can do, and they'll just say, yeah, let's try it. Let's give it a shot. I'll pay you $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month. Let's give it a shot. We'll see, 3 months later, we'll see where we're at. You try selling something that's $5,000 or $10,000 to the average buyer online, and they need 1,000 testimonials and a 5-year track record, and you better have 20,000 followers on Instagram or you're nobody. And I like, if I was to go back and slap my former self, 5 or 10 years ago, that's what I would tell you. Is like, hey, just get around the ultra successful first, and see what problems they have and offer to try to take a whack at solving them. And I guarantee you'll come across something that works really well, and all of a sudden you'll have something you can package and then take to other people, and you'll have the endorsement of really influential people that'll introduce you to a bunch of people that have that same problem. Start there rather than starting at the bottom of the market and then trying to work your way up and be more expensive.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much gold in there. There is that whole idea, and I've fallen for it and I learned it the hard way, and I've seen it play out a million times. There seems to be that misconception, especially in the beginning, when you kind of new somewhere and you sort of know that you haven't actually earned your expertise yet, that selling something at a lower price somehow makes it an easier sale.
Yes.
or makes it an easier project. Boy, is that wrong. Like, because I know. And there is a YouTube video. It's called like Selling the Invisible, and I can't remember the lady's name now, but I'll find it and put it in the show notes, because she talks about the psychology of why that is, that people who pay more tend to be better clients. Yeah. Right? Exactly how you just described.
Yeah, and they totally are.
Yeah, and I know, and I've learned this by accident, because I used to have, certain prices for for the dresses for little kids, right? And I would always feel kind of almost bad, because I know kids grow quickly, and this year the kid wants to dance flamenco, and next year they want to do football. So I was kind of thinking, oh God, if that was me, I wouldn't want to spend all that money on a dress that they wear once a year, right? So I was going, and so you try and make it accessible for the parents and whatever, and boy, were these parents a nightmare. They'd go, and I'd have them literally turn the biggest compliment they'd give me was that they would turn the dress inside out looking for some fault to complain. And I'm like, oh, so if you can't find anything on the outside, so that means, that was kind of the biggest compliment. And then I stumbled into a project where I was called, where the deal was already done, fabric selected, prices discussed, and something happened to the dressmaker, right? And so they called me whether I could take over, and they were almost sheepishly asking whether I was okay with whatever the price was. And I'm like, well, okay. And I was, quietly, I was like, yes, because it was kind of double what I would have charged. The most easy peasy project, simple little cute dresses, parents happy, nobody caused a fuss. And I'm like, what is that? Right? And that video, Selling the Invisible, really explained the psychology behind it. And I'm like, there's, and you can see it everywhere. Yeah, it's exactly
it's crazy,
what you
isn't
just
it?
described.
Yeah, I love that. I'll have to check that video out.
I'll put it in, and I'll dig it out. I just can't remember her name now. But it's an old video, it's coffee that tastes fabulous, and she really goes, it's very funny. But so tell us about where people can go to find out about how they become micro-famous and what's on the horizon for you.
Well, I love getting, these types of conversations, and I love being on podcasts because they're really fun. It's fun to talk about this stuff and reach out and connect with different types of people. So if anybody wants to do the same thing, that's where I always recommend that people start. To me, that's kind of the foundational step of becoming micro-famous in this new world that we live in. And so if you want to go to howtogetfeatured.com, I did a class there on how to reach out to podcast hosts, like how to craft a story that you can use when you reach out to podcast hosts that gets their attention, gets them to say yes. And so that's there. But everything else, just go to getmicrofamous.com. Right now, we don't have a full-blown website there. It's just the links out to like the book and stuff like that, and the agency, and just track me down. I'm on Facebook. Easy to find if you just type in MicroFamous.
Fabulous. I love it.
Yeah.
So what's next for you?
Oh, what's on the horizon?
Headed?
Oh, that's a good question. So mainly, I think next year I'm going to start writing a series of like smaller field guides where we go into like different strategies and tactics to build thought leadership businesses, coaches, consultants, speaker, author types. Those are the people that I work with. And I want to be almost like a journalist of the industry, and start documenting what people are doing, some of the newer business models that are coming out, and just different aspects of the thought leadership business as complements to the MicroFamous book. And basically we're just out there building the email list, reaching people, promoting the book, and kind of building influence for the long haul. So I don't see much changing for me beyond getting back into the flow of writing a little bit more in 2021, and then hopefully the world getting back to normal.
Well, hopefully. Oh, thank you so much. There was just so much gold in this episode, so I'm looking forward to listening back myself.
I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much, and I'll speak to you again soon.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please don't forget to subscribe. And if you know people who might enjoy it too, please send them to passionbusinesspodcast.com.